So looking back, after all these years of owning this figure, I'm betting that most of you have not seen this hidden detail about this figure. Let's check it out. Greetings everybody, Dark Spider David here with another revisit to an old figure that I've reviewed in the past, only this time it's for a beefcake. A beefcake with 8 arms to hold you. And that is for the Spider-Man 2 Toybiz 12-inch Doc Ock figure here. And it's funny because even after all these years, 14 years later, I'm still kind of wondering to myself, why did I get this guy? What was it? Was I really that fascinated with Spider-Man 2 and that figure line that I needed to own 2 versions of Doc Ock, one in the 6-inch format that I'm going to try to get a review done as soon as possible, but also one for a 12-inch? Maybe it was because I was trying to compensate as far as making sure that I had a 6-inch and a 12-inch version for a potential stop-motion animation in the future so I can get close-ups and better detail, etc., etc. I don't know, I was obsessive, compulsive, that's probably where my OCD kicked off of. But here I have, regardless, the 12-inch Doc Ock figure even after all these years. This is actually one of the few figures that actually stayed up in my shelf and in clear view, so I was able to always kind of bring it about and be able to revisit it at any point in the future. And understandably, being a 12-inch figure, you're gonna have better detail, better paint job, but not without its quirks. I feel like the biggest quirk that will kind of resonate both in person and on camera is that there are pieces and features of this figure that are a little quote-unquote Fisher Price-y as far as the plastic quality, the shaping of some of the limbs and the arms, notably the legs and the arms. I would say out of the two, those are the more predominant ones as far as the pieces that when you kind of twist or handle, they're gonna have that, I don't want to say preschool toy, but that much more, like I said, Fisher Price kind of feeling to those items, those assets about the figure, where a little bit of that quality as far as the hollowness of the plastic and the feeling and the robustness, it's meant to be a much more durable figure for younger kids to play around with, whereas the 6-inch figures, sure, they're smaller, but they're meant to be more so for collector's items, for people who want to collect them and display them on the shelf in numbers and droves. And that's where the 12-inch figure kind of differentiates itself, where sure, like I said, you have better paint jobs as far as the actual saturation of the colors, the palette, everything. It's a little bit more accurate. You have his rubber coat, or at least this middle portion of the rubber coat here, in really good detail and paint allocation, especially that inwards part right here where it's brown, but it does have that kind of wooden texture, quote unquote, along with the green here on the front of the coat, as well as the buttons and the little touches here and there, along with the creases of the plastic. It is molded plastic, but it's definitely much thicker and much more durable rubber than that of the wrestler suit Spider-Man. Imagine, here I have a figure that only has a 2-year difference between that and the wrestler figure, and yet this is the one where the rubber has not deteriorated whatsoever. It could be made by a different company with a different base, a different chemical that has been able to stand the test of time, and this is proof right here that even after all these years, even in some of the more hotter environments, which is this room that gets hot from time to time whenever I do live streams or have all these lights set up for videos, it has still withheld rather durably, and as you can see, hasn't really deteriorated in any sort of the word, in any sort of fashion. So that's a really commendable thing on Toybiz's part to make this figure rather durable. But again, being 12-inch, it's meant to withstand really harsh environments, and one of those harsh environments are really small children that don't give a whip. And so here we have the inwards portion of the figure. You can see that there's really good detail on the clasp right here that goes around his waist. Could have used an additional paint job, maybe vary up the grays, maybe throw in some blacks right there to kind of give it that variation. But aside from that, you just got basic creases on the black pants right there with a couple of pouch detail and package going on right here on the side. I don't remember him having cargo pants, but that's exactly what they decided to throw in with the figure, as well as some fine detail on the shoes themselves. Then we get over to the arms, and again, as I mentioned, you have good molding and sculpting of the creases on the arms, but whenever you do handle the arms as far as articulation or movement, they have that Fisher Price kind of feel, as well as the hands themselves as well that are fixed in this position. And before you actually have a really good head sculpt reminiscent of Alfred Molina, albeit, I'm not trying to, say nothing here, but I do feel like they gave him a little bit of an extra tan as far as paint job on his skin, whether it be his face or even the chest area. I mean, they made my man yoked, so big props to that. But on top of that, you have that added kind of shade that is leans more towards his Molina rather than his Alfred, if that makes sense. But if you remove the glasses, you can definitely see the strong resemblance right there. There's no mistaking that that is in fact Alfred Molina, so that is in fact pretty dope, as well as good detail going on around on his hair, and the paint job is scraping a little bit. That's probably the only part that has kind of eroded over the course of time with the 14 years since past, where it does look a little bit of the brown in his hair has been chipped away or just scraped away over the course of time. It would have been a little neat to have gotten a better usage of the glasses. You can see right here that one side is kind of dangling off by a simple peg. There is a peg on the other side of the glass arc right here, the little holder, but for the life of me, I can't get it to fit inside of the hole that's on top right here. Every time I try to fit it in there, it just doesn't seem to want to stick. So he's either going to be wearing his glasses really awkwardly, like so, or you're just going to have to remove them or place them on top of his head or make it seem like he's, holding him with one of his hands or whatever. Whereas the other piece is actually pressed in rather well and it's stuck via an adhesive. So once I remove that, I fear that it's going to have the same implication as the other side and I'm not going to be able to put the glasses back on. So I've let them, and this is honestly an issue that has been there since I got the figure back in 2004, so I haven't really screwed with it whatsoever because I don't want to risk any further damaging of the figure. And then we get to the arms, and it's very apparent that it's the arms where a lot of that extra paint job, sculpting, and detail went into making it not look very Fisher-pricey, because it's the arms that definitely have what I'm gonna go on a limb, no pun intended, and say is actually equivalent to that of Hot Toys paint decals and detail, as far as the actual texture of the arms, the actual look of the arms, the robustness, the sculpting on each single little disc and rivet that gets separated via the arm as you kind of go along. And then we get to the claws themselves that are just really well sculpted, albeit the paint job could have been a little bit better because it does look like they went with a little bit of a shortcut this time around, where they just slapped a little bit of that chrome red and chrome blue here in the middle to make it seem like there's wirings and things going on right there. But in terms of the actual etching and detail going on inside of each of these little tendrils, these little fingers within the claw itself, as well as the centerpiece here, it's actually really well detailed and sculpted. It's no easy feat. It actually looks like they spent a good amount of time on those arms, and the same could be said about the bottom arms. The bottom arms are always going to have the much more distinguished grabby look as far as the claws are concerned, and they definitely kept that going here. They did get rid of a little bit of that chrome blue and they just opted to keep the red, but apart from that, you have the distinguished detail of having these pieces right here be a little bit broader, a little bit thicker, and having the edge of each of these fingers have a much more clasped look with the three-pronged piece right here, as opposed to the one singular pronged, more blade looking kind of aesthetic going on here on the top claw. So they made that very distinguishable and very obvious to make that stand out, as well as the chrome gold plating paint job going down right here at the bottom of the arm, as well as just the overall look is very, very pleasant. And each of the arms has a little bit of wiring going on inside of it, so in terms of posability, being able to kind of crease them and fold them out together for different variety of poses are always welcome, especially when it comes to the bottom arms here to be able to be used for support as far as posability or just balance. They could be used in that format, and plus each of these claws can either be rotated 360 degrees on its axis, and then each of these little fingers or tendrils could be moved at the base, or a middle point of articulation right there to kind of fold in this edge part right here inwards and outwards and kind of give it different looks, different personalities. The top pieces have always looked a little bit more surgical as opposed to the bottom ones that are meant to be more like grabbing arms to just kind of assist in his fusion reaction tendencies whenever he was doing that, but of course that's not exactly what he ended up using them for. My only issue is that when it comes to scope and actual scale, you know, if you really want to nitpick, is that the arms themselves aren't exactly to that scale. If you really look at his body and then at his arms, upon first glance, they look fine, but when you really think about it, these arms are actually supposed to be a little bit longer, so they might have cut back a little bit on the actual sizing and length of what the arms should be in relation to how they were portrayed in the film. But keep in mind, you're still dealing with a figure that was meant for younger children and supposed to be more durable for children. I feel like maybe if they had made them a little bit longer, they would have been more prone to being ripped or torn or cut, because kids be kids. And though the wireframe inside of the arms allows for great posability of the arms themselves, the possibility of Alfred himself, or Doc Ock himself here, is, a little bit more on the limited side. There's virtually no articulation going on here in the arm. As you can see, the elbow is fixed, but you do have a bicep swivel, as well as a joint here at the top of the arm that allows 360-degree vertical movement. You do have a swivel here in the wrist. You have a 360-degree joint in the head, of course. That's slightly tight, but it can get the job done. Granted, the coat has a chance of getting in the way. And then you do have two torso joints, one here at the bottom of the torso for some horizontal movement like so, as well as an upper joint right here for crunching inwards and outwards, but it's very stiff. You can hardly get anything done. In fact, especially with considering the placement of the upper torso along with this plastic piece or this rubber piece here of the jacket itself, movement of that joint is almost nulled at this point. So I honestly don't know why they threw it in there, but that's besides the case. And then you actually have the majority of the articulation going on in his legs. You have two joints here at the top, but they're positioned or molded in a very diagonal stance. You can kind of see the diagonal cut right here on the top of his legs. So whenever you move the legs, they're going to be moving in that fixed diagonal kind of placement, so that could be frustrating in the future if you ever decide to make certain poses. But to kind of alleviate that, there is a cut horizontal swivel joint here on the thigh, so you are allowed to move about that much, or 360 degrees technically speaking. Granted, in case you ever get confused as to where the leg should be, these pockets will then align to kind of show you where you're supposed to place them. You do have a double joint at the knee, so that's pretty cool that that's thrown in there, albeit it's a little stiff. So you do have double joints in the knee, a shin swivel right there, and then lastly an ankle joint that over the course of time has in fact stiffened up, but you can get it to move slightly upwards, as you can see, upwards and inwards like so. Now, one other last note that I want to make on Doc Ock here is that he does have removability of some parts. The most obvious one is that you can remove the arms themselves. They're a little stiff, but they do have a ball joint here at the base, and in giving it a quick tug, you can actually remove the arms. However, something that the instructions don't necessarily point out is that upon removal of the arms and good placement of the actual human arms that he has, you can actually remove the jacket itself, and in doing so you can actually see an extra added detail of the mechanical spine that's grafted to the back of Doc Ock himself. So that was a nice little added touch, but it does take a little bit of finessing with the rubber portion of his coat to be able to see that. And considering how old the figure is, I rarely ever do it these days, so if you do happen to have this figure and you want to give that a shot, just be ultra careful when removing the coat from his human arms. Like I said, removing the mechanical arms really easy. It's just held by a ball peg, so you just got to give it a tug and they'll come off. And after that, you just got to make sure to be careful with the rubber piece of the coat. Otherwise, it's a nice little detail that they managed to throw in. They didn't even have to paint it, considering how hidden away it is and considering the demographic of this figure, but it was a nice little touch. And yes, if you've been seeing the review thus far, you've noticed that I'm missing one of the little fingers on this particular arm. It broke off of this piece right here. There's a tiny little piece right here from that arm that was supposed to clasp into place where this hole is right here, and it has since broken off, and I've lost it during the big makeover deal that I had with this room. So since then I haven't been able to find it, but there you have a nice little proportionate kind of demonstration of how long the arms are overall when not connected to the figure. And as you can see, like I said before, one of my only gripes is that the actual scaling of the arms is not 100% accurate to that of Doc himself, but I digress. So looking back, after all these years of owning this figure, was it deemed necessary to own a second, much bigger, much more space occupying version of Doc Ock? No, it really wasn't. To be quite brutally honest, it really wasn't the case. But having owned him, there's definitely some welcome experiences that have come from owning this figure. And don't get me wrong, I did make good use of him when it came to those stop motion animations that I did for Spider-Man 2. I remember that I think a couple of times I did run some tests where in some wide shots I used the 6-inch version, and then on some close-ups I used this guy to get some better facial recognition off of his face and off of the detail of his arms. So he did bring his uses. But apart from that, it is nonetheless a figure that's meant for younger demographics that like to own Spider-Man related figures, especially when the movie was out in theaters in 2004. Since then, I'm glad that I own this figure. Don't get me wrong. Obviously, it comes with the whole added nature of nostalgia. But with that said, there's definitely a time and a place and a person that this figure is made for. So if you're a die-hard fan of collecting as many of those Spider-Man 2 figures from Toybiz as possible, sure, this is a welcome addition, but I don't not see myself in like 10, 15, 20 years time putting this guy up in some sort of yard sale or eBay listing, to be quite brutally honest. With that said, let me know what you guys think of the 12-inch Doc Ock figure in the comment section below. Make sure to check out this other video that's showing up on screen now for another Spider-Man or Batman related video. And I want to thank you for making it to the very end and watching. As always, stay safe, stay humble, and I'll see you later.